Good morning and welcome to yet another Link.net Users Group event. Today we are going to have our 17th Scott Guthrie Open Q&A. Scott has been with us for the past 4 years and has been running these Q&A sessions pretty much every quarter. Before I hand over to Scott, I want to do just a bit of housekeeping. First off, thanks to all our sponsors, Alltrip, Telerik, Inner Workings, Pluralsight, Winterlink Now, and Syncfusion for all of your support. Without your continued support, we just couldn't do what we're doing today. If you need to get hold of us, you can always email us at info@lidnug.org or catch us on the social on twitter.com/lidnug or facebook.com/lidnug. All events are recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/lidnug. And you can also catch us on our webpage, which is unfortunately still under redevelopment at lidnug.org. Just a reminder that we have Lidnug and Developmentor with Maurice de Beja doing Angular JS on the 14th of November. There's also another schedule coming up for an event in December, and more to be released about that soon. Even though Scott doesn't need much of an introduction, just here's a quick one. He's a Microsoft Vice President for the Windows Server and Tools. That means he's responsible for Windows Azure, Visual Studio, and the .NET Framework. He also has a blog on weblogs.asp.net/scottgoo. He does claim to build a few programs for Microsoft as well. And of course, he's a presenter. A quick picture of the demographics today. Quite a lot from Europe, quite a lot from North America, a few from the APEC region, one in South Africa, and a couple from South America. Some of the prizes we're giving out today, we're going to give away one Telerik Ultimate.NET Collection license to a lucky winner. Also going to give away 5 one-month passes to Pluralsight. And Syncfusion are giving everybody who has registered today a copy of Essential Studio for WinRT. That is pretty much about it. I'm going to hand over to you, Scott. Scott, thank you very much for coming back again.
My pleasure. Can people hear me okay?
Yeah, you're just fine.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining, I guess, the 17th chat session. Time flies. Basically, for people that are new to this, the general format is you can ask any question you want. There's a Q&A menu bar at the top of your live meeting. And if you open that, you should be able to submit a question. And I can see all the questions now on my screen that get asked. And basically what I try to do is answer as many questions as I can over the next 50-some minutes. And so any questions, fair game. And what I try to do generally is, as I see a bunch of questions coming in, I will try to stay on a particular topic and try to answer a few of them in that topic. And then I'll jump to another topic and kind of move around throughout the questions. So, fire away on the questions, and this next 53 minutes or so of the chat will be very much dependent on you guys asking questions, and I'll do my best to answer. So Tim posted the first question, which is, how was your day? So far, good. It's actually 10 a.m. here in Redmond, where I am right now, so it's a little bit of a rainy day, but going well so far. Brian asked a question, which is, what do you think is the most important update to Windows Azure SDK 2.2 that just came out? It's actually maybe worth spending just a few minutes talking about some of the great stuff that's come out in general recently. We've obviously had the Visual Studio 2013 and .NET 4.51 come out, which has a ton of great improvements, a lot of great improvements in ASP.NET, up and down the stack, both the Visual Studio tooling, Web API, MVC, SafeLR, and a whole bunch more. And then recently we've done a whole bunch of updates to Windows Azure. We're kind of shipping new releases of Azure pretty much every 3 weeks now. And Brian asked about some of the improvements that have come out as part of the Azure SDK 2.2 release, which we shipped about a little over 2 weeks ago. Some of the things that are really cool in that release, if you haven't tried it out yet, include remote debugging support. So you can now, inside Visual Studio, log into Azure directly inside VS. You don't even have to have the Windows Azure portal open. And you can, in the Solution Explorer, basically just right-click on a website or a cloud service or even a virtual machine, and you can now attach the debugger and remotely debug directly from your dev machine an app that's running inside the cloud. And that's probably, I think, one of the coolest things. There's lots of other great improvements inside that SDK release as well, but it's probably my favorite release overall, or favorite feature overall inside it. Let's see. Chris Ball asked a question, do you have Azure available in private internal cloud? We do actually have something in that we call the Windows Azure Pack, which is available for download and you can run in a private cloud environment. In fact, it runs on any version, or basically any instance of Windows Server, so you can run it in a hosted non-Azure cloud environment as well. It's a free download. It's available today. We actually just shipped it about a month ago. And the benefit of the Windows Azure Pack is it basically gives you a lot of the Azure features that you can run on pretty much any infrastructure. And so things like websites, virtual machines, Service Bus, SQL, as well as kind of the portal, HTML portal that we have inside Windows Azure to manage all of that. You can now basically install and run on your own local environment as well. So yeah, so that is available. It's great for environments where you don't feel quite ready to move your apps to the cloud, but potentially you might want to deploy or build some of your apps in the cloud and then deploy them on-premise. You could do that with the Azure Pack. Jason asked the question, can you talk about the roadmap of the .NET framework? Good question, Jason. I basically am responsible for the server-side pieces of the .NET framework now. And so I can definitely talk about the roadmap, things like ASP.NET, EF, WCF, workflow, things like that. And then there's sort of the .NET framework all up, including some of the work that's happening in the CLR and on the client side. You know, we just shipped .NET 4.51, so which is a pretty nice enhancement of .NET. And I mentioned some of the enhancements specifically with ASP.NET that I think are really powerful. And you know, I think one of the things you're seeing as part of this release is, you know, a ton of improvements to existing capabilities. Also, some really nice enhancements around kind of how you build distributed applications or multi-tier applications. So in particular, say with ASP.NET, we've added some really nice support for web APIs with Web API 2.0 that shipped as part of this release, as well as SignalR, which enables real-time communication. And the combination, I think, really enable you to build apps that work great not only against, say, HTML, JavaScript-based browser apps, front ends, but also against any mobile or client app as well, whether it's you know, Windows 8 app or WPF or Silverlight app, or whether it's, you know, an iOS or Android app as well. And you know, I think, you know, the one of the things that we're trying to do certainly on the server side is be great not only for web-based apps, but really kind of be great for these kind of mobile backends and client app backends of the future. And so, you know, I think this is a pretty exciting release from that perspective. In terms of what happens, what are the focus areas for .NET going forward? You know, I think you're going to continue to see that focus around productivity, performance. There's a lot of great things that are coming down the pipe that's going to kind of enable you to build, you know, even larger and more distributed apps even better. I think you'll see a continued emphasis around improving performance even more and tuning it. A lot of focus around diagnostics and debuggability, which we're kind of increasingly seeing for people that are building large apps or things that they want us to kind of invest even more in. And then also, you know, I think with this release for client app development, there's a bunch of really great improvements that have happened with the XAML stack that's shipping inside of Windows, and a lot of richness in terms of client app development as well. John Snyder asked the question, why does VS 2012 not support setup projects for the creation of MSIs? And I've heard many people complain about that, no explanation of why it was removed. Good question, John. I didn't, I actually didn't manage Visual Studio on the 2012 release, so I can't talk specifically about the details of why it was removed, because I wasn't there. But, if I remember, some of the concerns that people have kind of had over the years with setup projects has been, they're kind of good for some things, but for an awful lot of scenarios, they just weren't rich enough or advanced enough. And that was one of the reasons why, I think you're seeing us kind of embrace things like Wix more, and pointing to kind of some of those kind of tooling and support. And I think we've seen some good success with people that are building those. And so I think that's the plan. Although, to be honest with you, I'm not close enough to it to know exactly, but I believe that was the reason why they're no longer built into Visual Studio itself. Let's see. Let's see. Florian asked a question. Do you agree that the business app space is lost massively from discontinuation of Silverlight? Also, is MS concerned about the trend started by Chrome with the native apps, similar to how IE would have worked if Silverlight was rendered natively by IE? Good question. There's a couple different aspects of that. In terms of from a business app perspective, I think there's a couple different trends that I generally see around three. One is two that are kind of new trends, and then one that exists as well, which is one trend is the move towards browser-based business apps that can be hosted and run across multiple devices. And so, I think one of the trends that I'm seeing, at least, is a lot of organizations that want to be able to write one app and have it work on any browser, whether it's mobile or whether it's Windows or Mac or any other type of device, and the ability to run it both at home and at work. Increasingly, we're hearing kind of demands for how do employees log in and do stuff on the weekend, or kind of more this trend that someone's called bring your own device, which might mean, how does it work on an employee cell phone or a partner cell phone or something like that. And so I think that's a trend that we hear, and that's one of the reasons why for things like ASP.NET, we've kind of invested pretty heavily in working great with mobile browsers as well as desktop browsers, and embrace that. I think we're also seeing a trend around some percentage of business apps that want to go native. I don't mean by that meaning C++, but more a case of they want to basically be kind of more apps that are kind of integrated inside the shell and experience of devices, whether those are iOS or Windows 8 or Android or Windows 8. And so I think one of the things that we're investing in as a company, and heavily with .NET, is how can you build those types of app experiences? And we're doing that both with Windows 8, Windows Phone 8, but also by partnering with folks like Xamarin, enabling them to use your .NET skills to also build iOS and Android apps that are native as well. I think it's fair to say that for right now, for building those types of native apps, the primary use case that Visual Studio has kind of focused on the last release or two has been on enabling consumer apps. That doesn't mean that you can't build business apps, but I would say 90% of the focus has probably been on enabling not purely business apps, but making sure they kind of go after the consumer space. But even with this latest release, I think they're starting to kind of see more in the XAML space, in particular for Windows 8, where you can now build business apps there as well. It doesn't mean there aren't some issues still there, but I just saw Rocky Locta's post about, I think CLSA.NET is now working inside Windows 8 apps with XAML. I'm seeing more kind of framework support there, and so I do think that'll be an area where you'll see continued investment. And then obviously I think so I mentioned kind of two new categories of devices and browser-based business apps. I think also, there's still a lot of demand for how do you build really rich desktop applications. And so someone asked, actually P. Michaels asked, what about WPF? Does Microsoft have a replacement for that? No, we don't see replacing WPF. I think we think of WPF as a great way you can build desktop business apps. It's not going away. And even with this release that just came out, there's a number of improvements to both WPF and then obviously overall the .NET and the Visual Studio tooling around it. And so I think it's important people don't worry or don't get freaked out that the desktop apps are going away. They're not going away. Having said that, I think you're also seeing us invest more in mobile and invest more in tablets and touch and in browser-based, partly because we do see a lot of demand there for people that want to use .NET in those environments as well. And so that's partly why you're seeing lots of new things happening there. But you're going to continue to see us invest in desktop, not only for WPF, but also for native C++ apps as well, and WinForms and so forth. So it's not going away, but that's partly why you're seeing so much focus on the mobile and web, is because that's the place where I think we're seeing the most demand right now for new investments. But these things tend to be in equilibrium, so at some point that'll probably stabilize, and you'll see even more investments for things like desktop and other form factors as well. Other questions? CDES question: what, according to you, is the most valuable feature for developers in Azure? I think if I had to say what's the most valuable thing for developers in Azure, I'd probably focus less on a individual feature. There's lots of great developer features in Azure. I think the biggest value for a developer with Azure, though, is the agility that it provides. One of the things I like to say when I start presentations is often ask people, hey, you start a new project inside your enterprise or inside your organization and you decide you need a database. How long does it take for you to order a database from your IT department? And it often varies. The best case is often days to get a virtual machine or a hardware set up with a database running on it. Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months. You can go to Azure and you can create a new database literally in 5 seconds and start programming against it and use ADO.NET and EF and all the .NET and Visual Studio skills that you know and love against it. That's, I think, the most powerful feature is the fact that as a developer, you're no longer bottlenecked by waiting to get resources, and you also now have this really rich tool chest available that you can start programming against that enable you to build new types of apps that you just couldn't build today, either because it would take process-wise too long to do, or it would just be too painful to stand up all the infrastructure in an on-premises environment. Let's see. William asked a question. Well, Azure Portal Access. Since we're using our MSDN affiliate account to manage the portal, what is the best way to access the portal for our developers? I noticed that in Windows 8.1, it's really hard to gain access. I'm not entirely sure what you mean, William. If you can maybe send me an email, I can probably help. You should be able to use your MSDN account to log into Windows Azure just fine. And I'm not familiar with any issues with Windows 8.1 with it working. So send me an email and I can potentially help you if you're having an issue with that. But for people that don't know that are on the line, if you're an MSDN customer, you can basically sign up to Windows Azure, and you don't need a credit card, and you get free MSDN credits as an MSDN subscriber that you can use on it. And so if you're an MSDN professional, you get $50 a month. MSDN Premium is $100 a month, and Ultimate is $150 a month. And those are on discounted rates of services. And so you can spin up, multiple VMs and run them for the entire month. And every month you get new credits. And so it's definitely, if you're a developer, frankly, even if you're not looking to run something on Windows Azure, and you just want to do dev tests in the cloud, or you just want to experiment on a side project, take advantage of those MSDN credits. They're really good resources and awfully good and nice to use. Leon asked a question: any plans to improve JavaScript tooling and debugging inside Visual Studio? There's a bunch of improvements coming out with the Visual Studio 2013 release, in particular, there's a bunch of great support. I don't remember what we called it. I think it's browser link. We went back and forth on the names. I don't remember what we officially called it. But basically, one of the things that lets you do is actually it makes it much easier to kind of do JavaScript tooling debugging with multiple browsers. And so, especially if you have like a multiple monitor environment, it's really nice because you can basically keep multiple browsers open. So you could have Firefox, Chrome, IE open on one screen. You could have Visual Studio open on another. And you can basically make changes, and with one keystroke, you can basically update all the browsers simultaneously. It makes it much easier to go ahead and do your development. Even as a question, Microsoft's recently begun to embrace open source software. Does Microsoft have plans in the near future to expand their open source efforts and further drive the open source community? Currently, it seems fairly disparate. We're definitely doing a lot with open source, I'd say, especially with Windows Azure and our server-based things. And we're really doing kind of two aspects. One is how do we embrace open source that already exists, that's out there? And then also, how do we actually contribute our software under an open source license as well and enable kind of more collaborative communities around it? And so, I think we've made some good progress in both. And so, if you look at ASP.NET and Entity Framework, those have now all been open source for over a year, or almost 18 months, I want to say. And the most recent release that just shipped includes tons of improvements, including some by non-Microsoft employees or developers. And so it's great, I think, not only to see us releasing the stuff under open source, but more importantly, taking code that others have written and we're actually shipping it as part of Visual Studio and .NET. And I think that's kind of a big improvement over the last couple of years. But then there's also going to be us embracing other existing technologies that are already out there. With Windows Azure, we actually host our Azure SDKs on GitHub. Some of our features that we have inside Azure, like we have a new service that just launched actually earlier this week, or last week actually, which is our HDInsight service, uses Hadoop. And so we're using Hadoop and Pig and Hive and all these open source big data technologies, running it as a service and allowing you to build extensions with it using .NET. So it's kind of a win-win, I think, for everyone. So I think you'll see us do even more going forward, and hopefully continue to see us continue to make progress there. Keaton asked a question, will Microsoft support other view engines apart from Razor? Officially, we support both the ASPX view engine and Razor. We work with the community, so there's a bunch of other great view engines out there. There's a Haml-based and a few others. In terms of ones that we officially support, meaning like we ship in the box and product support, is available 24/7. I don't think we right now have any plans to add additional view engines, but with things like NuGet and with the extensibility we're providing, we certainly are definitely partnering with lots of people that are building view engines, and we're going to try to make sure that they work great as well. Mike Disiboyo asked a question. Can you give a brief summary of where you see Microsoft and .NET in relation to enterprise and business development that is not Azure or mobile-oriented, i.e. traditional data-driven internet or desktop apps? I ask this regarding statements from Microsoft becoming devices and services focused. Well, in terms of enterprise development, I mean, certainly, I think we're doing a lot with enterprise development, including ones that are not tied to Azure or have any mobile backend, support. All of the stuff that we just shipped recently with ASP.NET on the back end works not only just in Azure, but you can use it on IIS on top of SQL. You can even self-host it in your own process or overall or other environment. And so on the backend side, you can use all of our backend technologies everywhere. We have database offerings inside Azure that are based on SQL, but we also have a great release coming up with SQL 2014 which has a ton of great improvements as well. We just shipped a CTP for. So on the back end, from that perspective, there's lots of investments. Likewise, I think if you look at all of the improvements happening in .NET 4.51, there's lots of language and library improvements and tooling improvements and IntelliSense improvements that are great for desktop applications. And so independent of whether you're running it on a mobile device or a tablet or Windows 8, you just want to run it on even Windows 7 in desktop mode or any other type of Windows version. I think you're seeing great. Hopefully, there's a lot of great tooling improvements coming out from that. So I think you'll continue to see that. Increasingly, we are trying to be devices and services focused because we do see that there's a broad industry trend towards those two areas in particular. But we also are going to continue to be desktop and server focused, given that those are traditional strengths of ours today, and we see majority of our customers deploying apps on top of those. So I would encourage you to think of it not as sort of a zero-sum game where if we do one, that means we're going to stop doing the other. We're going to invest all of them, we definitely see a world where all of those aspects are really important. Jim K asked the question: Is Windows Azure Connect now officially gone? Is Service Bus Relay its replacement? Windows Azure Connect, I'd say probably the thing that we're focusing on the most right now. Well, the Windows Azure Connect enabled you to do some hybrid network connectivity. And so the thing that we kind of think of as more the replacement for Windows Azure Connect is some of the virtual gateway capabilities that we've added to Windows Azure. And so you can now create virtual networks, and you can do what are called both site-to-site VPNs as well as point-to-site VPNs. And the point-to-site is probably the closest replacement to Windows Azure Connect, and it enables you to set up a virtual private network between a server or machine on-premise and in the cloud without having to set up any firewall rules or, frankly, even tell your IT department that exists. And so that's now available, and you can use that inside Azure today. We also then have the site-to-site connectivity that lets you, say, connect up a hardware router to your network on-premise and then bridge it to the cloud. The Service Bus Relay then is a higher level connectivity option, which is more app-specific. And so that also is an option for something you can use, where if you want to kind of do app-to-app communication without having to open up a virtual private network where you can kind of do any type of IP traffic. So that's another option you can use. Is SharePoint moving to an online-only platform? I'm noticing a few MVPs that are up in arms because of recent moves by Microsoft. No, my understanding is, you'll continue to see updates to SharePoint and Exchange and the other products on premises in the future. So I don't think it's entirely moving to a services-based only option. Having said that, again, the trend that we're seeing from a lot of customers and from developers is that they'd much rather have SharePoint work as a service that they can depend on, and which is updated much more agilely than necessarily having to run their own SharePoint farms on premises. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is with Office 365, is be able to provide that service, and then also make sure that from a developer perspective, we make it really easy for you to build apps against that as a service and take advantage of it. Easiest way to automate with .NET 4.5 and legacy apps, e.g. migrate VB6 to .NET framework. There's a couple tools out there. If you shoot me a mail, I can probably connect you with some folks on the VB team who might have the best recommendations. But there are some tools that do automated code conversion from VB6 to .NET. And so, yeah, if you shoot me a mail, I can try to help point you to a few of those. Let's see. Chris Ball, do you have any tools to process text documents to process big data? We have a requirement to process small sets of documents around 200 gigabytes and do not want to use big infrastructure. Do you have any server product to process small set of text analytics? One thing you might want to look at, Chris, is the new HDInsight service that we just launched. That allows you to basically run MapReduce jobs on things stored in Windows Azure Storage. And so you could upload 200 gigs of data. We also have a new option that we just launched actually this week where you can actually mail us hard drives. So if you've got many terabytes of data, that's often faster to transfer with a hard drive than it is actually over the internet. And so that's also an option, and I think we charge like $40 for 4 terabytes. So it's relatively cost effective also to kind of transfer lots of data quickly. And so that's something you can take advantage of. And with the HDInsight, it makes it really easy. You can spin up a whole bunch of compute nodes and run a MapReduce job that can do analytics and conversion and process documents and basically output them in whatever format you want. And so there's lots of customers that are now using that to do kind of what you're describing there, which is process documents and kind of unstructured content, whether it's text or XML or JSON or just CSV, come separated, and do some type of conversion. And the great thing about MapReduce is it lets you distribute the work across lots of machines, and so you can scale it out and do things real quick, and then you can just tear down the Hadoop cluster when you're done, and you're only paying for the minutes you're using it, so it ends up being pretty cost effective. So Brian's question, what is the reason for the 16K size limitation of the Windows Azure scheduler job size? Not entirely sure. You send me a mail, I can find out. I'm not sure if that's, you can only run 16,000 types of jobs, but shoot me a mail and I can find out for you. So Adam asked the question, we're planning on moving a website to Azure that contains gigabytes of files within the website that the users upload. Would it be a good idea to move these files to cloud storage? Yeah, I would actually recommend that, Adam. So yeah, one of the things that we have with Windows Azure is a service we call kind of blob storage or Windows Azure storage. And the benefit of it is it enables you to kind of upload literally petabytes of data if you need to. And you don't have to worry about backing up the disk because it includes kind of built-in backup services, and it's highly available, and you can connect to it from any number of web servers. And so, yeah, I would recommend if you're enabling users to upload files, definitely take a look at Windows Azure Blob Storage. It provides a lot of great capabilities that you can use. And it's very cost-effective to do those types of scenarios. Yeah, I think the price is like 9 cents per month per gigabyte. And so, if you've got a few gigabytes of content, it's probably less than $1 a month to actually run it. Built into the price is something called global replication, which basically means we can copy the data somewhere else in the world for you, still inside the same geography. So if it's inside the U.S., it'd stay in the U.S. If it was in Europe, it'd stay in Europe. But it basically gives you kind of also a disaster recovery scenario where even if like a meteor takes out that particular part of the world that your web app is currently in, your data won't be lost. So it's a great feature. Take advantage of it. It's very cost effective. Ritesh asked a question, are there any plans to bring SQL Azure closer to SQL Server Standard in terms of functionality? Yes, the plan is definitely how do we add even more features to SQL Azure. We're also looking to make sure you can run SQL Server inside a virtual machine inside of Azure really well. And so that also is definitely an area that we're investing in. Dan asked the question, as a new Microsoft.NET developer, do you have any recommendations on what areas of Microsoft development to focus on, given the market trends and where the future development will be? It's a good question, Ben. I mean, I think generally the thing I typically recommend from a career perspective is, invest in kind of core skills that are going to always serve you well. And so some of them are just sort of design skills, some of them are kind of language skills. So, really mastering, say, C# and understanding, how best to structure code and architect code, how to test code, are really useful regardless of whether you're building a mobile app, a cloud app, a desktop app, console app, or any other type of app, web app, etc. So, I think there's a core set of skills I'd recommend just sort of focusing on there. And then I would pick an area that you think you're particularly interested in. So if you're more of a UI person, gravitate towards the UI. If you're more of a back-end or data person, gravitate more to the back-end. And then, go deep there as well. And then, but having that core set of skills, will let you of design and testing and the language aspects and just sort of structuring projects will help you kind of on anything. Obviously I'm biased on the cloud right now, so I think the cloud's a great place to go deep on. But I'd recommend kind of that core set of skills will make sure you can do anything, and you can always move from area to area and be productive. Tim asked, what impact does the need for security have on the future skills of developers? Does everyone need to be an expert when developing on Azure? In general, I would say it's good for every developer to have a base understanding of security concepts. I think regardless of whether you're building a mobile client app, whether you're building a desktop app that connects to a backend, whether you're building a backend app or a web app that's exposed on the internet, having a core set of skills and knowledge on security is useful. I don't think you have to necessarily be an expert, but there's a core set of things that you want to look for and know, like, hey, I want to design my app around these kind of principles that I think will end up enabling you to build much better apps and much more secure apps. And as more people are using apps around the world, or as more apps are connected and not just sort of single machine, security is going to be pretty important. There's some good books out there one by Michael Howard from Microsoft Press around building secure apps that might be worth looking at, that just kind of provide some good general knowledge and ways to think about security that you might want to think about. Jason asked the question, will it be possible to install add-ons to the Azure portal without having a credit card on file? Like, for example, for MSDN subscribers, the companies that use invoicing. It appears that even free add-ons cannot be added without a credit card. That is something we're looking at changing in the future, Jason. Unfortunately, I don't have a timeline for it just yet, but that is something that we're talking about improving, so you don't need a credit card for that. So hopefully stay tuned for the future. P. Michaels asked the question, given that Microsoft's newfound focus support for Git, are there plans to merge Codeplex into GitHub? No, there's no plans to merge with GitHub, Codeplex with GitHub. What I think you will see is the new Team Foundation service that's out that now supports Git as well. I do think you'll see Codeplex and Team Foundation service share even more going forward, though. And the great thing is Git works across both of those as well. Well, the last question, Xamarin, is this your recommended environment for developing on .NET but deploy to Windows 8, Windows Phone, and Android and iOS? Yeah, if you want to build a single kind of core base library or core set of functionality that you want to run on the client across Windows 8, Windows Phone, Android, and iOS, then yeah, I would definitely look at Xamarin. I think they got a great offering there. Does Microsoft have plans to add support to split CSS bundles to address IE8, 99, 4095 selector limits? I don't know entirely, Joe. I don't know if you've taken a look at the Web Essentials product that Mads Christensen maintains. Mads is a member of the ASP.NET team and helps with Visual Studio tooling for web. But he also builds something called Web Essentials, which is available as a free extension that's out of band as well. He might have a tool that actually does that. He does have less in SAS support. In fact, some of that's now supported inside Visual Studio Native as well. So it might be worth taking a look at that. Let's see. So Justina's question, is there programs that help students or people that are learning to use programming afford Visual Studio with an MSDN license? There are programs, Justine, for people that are in school. We do have a program called DreamSpark for people that are in school. If you send me mail, I can try to hook you up with that program and see what we can do to help. Transport data encryption for SQL Azure database. Question was Florian around the roadmap for that. I don't know the roadmap for that right now, I'm afraid. I know you can use this with virtual machines. with SQL databases running inside that. If you send me email, though, I can try to follow up and find out. John asked a question, our virtualized infrastructure runs on VMware, not Hyper-V. What, if any, restrictions does this place on our ability to integrate with Azure? We actually are building an import tool, John, that will allow you to take VMware instances and actually import and run them on Windows Azure. And in fact, if you have any of those tools today, there are some tools out there today that convert on-premise to Hyper-V to like a VHD format. You can actually use those with Windows Azure as well. So that is something we're looking to enable. CDAS question, how many times have I met Bill Gates? Quite a few. I actually don't know how many, but I used to see him a lot more before he retired, but I do still see him occasionally. So it's always fun getting together with Bill. Jenny asked a question, does Azure support spinning up Windows Server and then running VirtualBox on it so I can upload my existing VDI and run it there? Unfortunately, Danny, we don't right now support the ability to run virtualization inside virtualization. So you can definitely spin up a Windows Server and you can terminal server into it, but you can't run, say, VirtualBox or another virtualization stack inside a Hyper-V virtualization session, I'm afraid. Let's see. Someone asked a question around core support and when it was coming for storage. It's no longer on this list, but that is something that's coming hopefully relatively soon. It's taken a little bit longer than we originally planned, but I think we feel pretty confident that it'll be out by the end of the calendar year. It's actually already supported on some of our storage clusters, but we won't kind of announce it or turn it on broadly until it's available and installed on all of them. But it is being rolled out right now across our storage clusters, and we'll get cores and JSON support very shortly. Willem asked the question, when will MVC5 ship? When does it due, if at all? Good news, Willem, is it actually shipped 2 weeks ago. So MVC5 is actually already out. And so if you check my blog posts, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we kind of announced it as part of the Visual Studio 2013 release. And so it's definitely out and available today. Let's see. Michael Salazar asked a question, in new web applications that are being developed, how is MVC trending against web forms? It's a good question, Michael. I'd say for existing apps, there's still probably more web forms being maintained than MVC. For brand new apps, I think it's generally about 50-50 in MVC and web forms. And then I think we're also starting to see a trend towards people, whether they're building it with web forms or MVC, also, increasingly exposing their logic and their functionality of their app using web APIs, and then calling that directly from, say, JavaScript on the client for web apps, or from a mobile app or a tablet app on other form factors. And so one of the things that we've tried to do with the new VS 2013 release and ASP.NET release is we have this notion of something called the One ASP.NET project template. And what that lets you do is basically you can now start any project, whether it's with web forms or MVC or web API, and you can add in other technologies as well. So you can actually have a web forms app that uses web API, or an MVC app that uses web API, or even have an app that uses web forms, MVC, and web API all together. And so increasingly we kind of are investing in how do we let you fuse all those technologies together so that it's not an either-or decision, you can actually use all of them. Leon asked the question, other than BizTalk, are there any other enterprise service bus products that facilitate communication between web API-based services? I think you're going to see more services that facilitate that communication in the future, Leon. Certainly what you can do is you can use workflows in addition to BizTalk to do the orchestration of those. And then we have something called the service bus on Windows Azure that also runs on Windows Server, but it's also really good for as a messaging layer that lets you interconnect across apps as well. It doesn't use web API as a protocol, although I think in the future you'll probably be able to see people actually attach and use that. John asked the question, are Nokia's here maps replacing Microsoft's Bing Maps? I have to be honest with you, I've never actually used Nokia's here maps, and so I don't think it's replacing, but I'm not, so I don't think so, but I'm not, I don't actually know enough to even know what I'm saying, so sorry. Lauren asked about my future job plans. No plans to be a CEO, sorry. Just a question, where any plans for live cloud services to be able to host multiple virtuals where individual virtuals can be deployed separately for updates, fixes. We have multiple applications that fall in the generic category and do it just by having a cloud service per app. So I think what you're looking for is, can you kind of virtualize your apps across a single set of instances? We don't right now have that for cloud services, although you could do it that way. One of the things we do allow you to do that with, though, is with both websites which support web apps, as well as mobile services which support mobile backends. That does allow you to use a single set of virtual machine infrastructure, and it automatically virtualizes the applications within them. Now, they're web and mobile tier specific in that case, but that might be something to think about. Lisman asked the question, how to take automated SQL Azure database backups. If you click on your database inside the Windows Azure portal, Lisman, there is I think it's the Configure tab, it's the rightmost tab, and within there's a way you can export your database. And one of the options for exporting your database is automated exports. And that lets you set up rules where you can say once a night or once a week, automatically basically back up my database in a transactional way to an export file and save it in blob storage, which you can then geo-replicate hundreds of miles away. And so that's actually pretty easy to set up in a fully automated way now. Bloom asked the question, Nokia 1520, would you agree this is the phone of choice for Windows 8 phone testing and demonstration? I haven't actually used that particular phone myself. I have a Nokia 1020, which I really like, that has a great camera on it. It's great to see a lot of these cool phones kind of appearing here. Chris Wallace question, are there any plans to come out with free MOOCs, massive open online courses on Microsoft Training? We have the Microsoft Learning Gallery, or Virtual Academy, I think it's called. So we do have a way to do training on Microsoft technology. So that is something maybe worth checking out and looking at. Tim asked a question, how do you debug authentication errors in Visual Studio when creating a new ASP.NET project with organizational accounts in Azure AD? I don't receive any free feedback. If you send me a mail, Tim, I'd be happy to hook you up. My email, by the way, for anyone that I've said send me mail to is scottgu@microsoft.com. So scottgu@microsoft.com. Send me a mail, Tim, and I'd be more than happy to connect you with someone on the team to help debug that issue. Sorry you're running into a problem, but if you send me a mail, we can definitely take a look and figure it out. John asked the question, one of the challenges around increased mobile device usage is the need to support both offline and online access solutions. Is there something that we're looking to do to enable more turnkey solutions for building offline apps? John, it is something we're looking at. We don't have anything to announce just yet, but I agree that would be awfully nice to have in the future. Hint, hint. Let's see. Ed asked the question, what is the best way for a VB6 developer to learn ASP.NET, including the JavaScript assembler machine code debug windows that pop up when I run the web app? Probably the best way to learn ASP.NET, Ed, is to actually go to the www.asp.net website. That actually has a bunch of great training material on it. And probably the best place to get started in terms of kind of learning the different features and how to take advantage of them. Really just a question, any suggestions on Microsoft certification related to Azure for architects and senior developers? Unfortunately, I don't know of any official certification classes right now, but there is, if you go to the Azure website, click on the documentation tab, there is some best practices guidance that's out there that's pretty good. From our customer advisory team. And there's a bunch of online videos and training there that you can check out. I think it's like 15 hours of it. That would be really good to kind of look at and helps you build great apps. Scott Addy asked the question, what's the recommended approach for fire and forget logging of requests in ASP.NET Web API 2? Not 100% sure. Sorry, me. If you mean basically if how to implement on the back end when you say a client's hitting a web API, how do you just sort of fire and forget that you're logging it? One approach that you can do, I mean, so if it's hosted inside IIS or inside, say, Azure websites or something like that, we are logging the HTTP logs. So that you get some built-in fire and forget logging there. If you want, you can also use system diagnostics and the trace listener inside there, or some of the frameworks that build on top of that to do additional logging. And one of those things about diagnostics is the trace listener works in the background and basically, every couple seconds actually writes, say, 100 or 200 log entries to disk at the same time. And so that can give you kind of the velocity you're looking for. If you're looking to do some type of custom behavior, the other thing you can do is take advantage of async support so that you're not blocking the thread, and you could fire a post to a queue or to a log file and maybe do an async so that your server can continue to process things. Let's see. David asked the question that developer skills are relative, and often, depending on the different organizations, some would be stronger than else. And the question was sort of around certification. We do have, I believe, certification for .NET and for C# that you can take and kind of get certified. I'm afraid I'm not that familiar with the specifics of them, but I believe there are some out there, and I definitely agree. For example, Azure, we don't have those yet, and that's something that we need to add as part of that. A few people have asked me about, I think Leon and Usman, about do we have a naming service? We don't have a name server, meaning we don't do DNS hosting today, but you can, Usman, you can absolutely map an A record of a domain to a VIP in a cloud service. So you can, or a website or a mobile service for that matter. So you can definitely use A records as well as CNAME records and map them to endpoints. Right now, the way you do that, for example, like the way I host my domains, I actually use GoDaddy, which is a DNS hoster, but you can use any DNS hoster you want, and then you basically just point it to the IP address of the service hosted inside of Azure, and you can go ahead and map the domain that way. David Haney asked the question, what's the best way to multiplex a single socket or pool of sockets on a client that need to talk to a server efficiently over multiple threads? One thing you might want to look at, David, is SignalR. It does a bunch of pretty cool things that let you build communication back and forth between a server and a client. And it does have a notion also of sessions, and it's scaled very, very well. And it can actually take advantage of WebSockets and other kind of protocols under the covers, but it can fall back to HTTP in the case of either a firewall blocking WebSockets or the endpoint not being open. So that might be something to look at, and it's got really rich .NET support both on the client and on the server. Will asked the question, there's a Azure plus WCF training next Wednesday, on November 13th. So it sounds like there is a training course if people want to do there. You can go ahead and take advantage of it. Dave asked the question, with an enterprise with 30,000 employees, what sort of expectations can we have for the number of SignalR clients on Windows Server 2003 or 2012? Probably best thing to do is post in the SignalR forum, Dave, and probably either Damien or David Fowler, who are kind of the two geniuses behind SignalR, can probably respond. But I believe you can actually support literally hundreds of thousands of sessions with one or two servers, and so you might be able to scale that very well. This is the next question, just follow up on when I said you can point your IP address. What are the risks that the IP will change for the hosted service on Azure? As long as you don't delete the deployment, or stop the deployment entirely, the IP address will never change. And so you should, for a cloud service, you should be fine as long as you keep deploying to it or upgrade or VIP swap. You won't have any problems with the IP address changing. We are also adding the ability to just sort of reserve an IP forever, even if you stop or tear down an application. That'll be coming out in the future as well. But for right now, as long as the app is continuing to run or you continue to update it, the IP address should be fixed. John asked the question, are you aware of a good starting resource for learning testing, maybe a good beginner's book? There are a number of good books out there, John. Probably search on, unit testing and .NET, and probably find some good ones there. There's also some good training courses from Pluralsight that I actually subscribe to, and they even have like a free 1-month subscription so you can try it out. But they have a number of good, including a good beginner course from Julie Lerman on unit testing that you might want to check out if you want to watch it in video form as well. I apologize, I'm probably going to need to wrap up in the next minute or two, so I'm going to answer 2 more questions. First one here is from Chris W. Have you thought about including some sort of mobile payment services into Azure Mobile Services? Would love to have a mobile and Azure-friendly way to collect payment and/or credit card data from mobile apps. That is something, Chris, that I think is on our roadmap that we're looking at. In the meantime, you can use it. There's a variety of kind of third-party payment services as well that you can call from your mobile backend. And so that is something I think you might want to look at, but I totally agree. It would be awfully nice to have more payment kind of capabilities built in as a feature. So hopefully in the future you'll see that. Let's see, what other one? John asked, is Entity Framework intended to remove the need to use a repository pattern for your database access code? It doesn't. The Entity Framework doesn't really remove the need for a repository pattern. I mean, it provides more of an object relational mapper. And so the nice thing about the Entity Framework is it lets you, especially the code first version, it lets you define models, so like your product object or your customer object, and you can do it in what's called a plain old CLR object way or POCO way. So you don't have to derive from a base class or implement specific interfaces. And so it does make it very easy to kind of model your model objects. And then it has a fairly light context object that you can use to do persistence. Often what people do is they use the model objects directly, and then they create a repository interface that uses the context object, and so they're still abstracting out the persistence. And that way you can continue to use kind of the repository pattern, but the implementation of the repository pattern gets a lot easier with Entity Framework code first. So it doesn't really remove the need to do a repository pattern, and from a patterns perspective, the repository pattern can be very powerful. But I do think it makes it a little bit easier to implement in a clean way. So unfortunately, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I want to thank everyone for attending. If you joined late and you missed some of the early questions, the good news is this session is being recorded, and so the audio version of this talk will also be available. And I'll do this again in another couple months. This is number 17, so I think number 18 will probably be coming up soon. And look forward to chatting with you more in the future. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Scott. Yet again, another fantastic Q&A session from you. I'm pretty sure most of the people in here got something very productive out of that, as usual. And I can see people now coming in saying thank you, and thank you, and thank you. A lot of great info. Anyways, we're looking forward to having you back again. And as Scott said, this recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in probably the next day or two. Lastly, but not least, I just want to quickly mention some of the prizes. You'll be getting an email. If you register, you'll be getting an email from Eventbrite sent on our behalf with the details for the Essential Studio for WinRT from Syncfusion. There's been a bit of a glitch with my Prune site code, but that will be remedied as well. And Robert Tannenbaum was the winner of the generic Ultimate.NET collection, which is now called DevCraft Ultimate. Congratulations, Rob, and I hope everybody had a good time.